How's it going, everyone? I'm Keegs, and I wanted to work up to one of my favorite Green Lantern stories, Blackest Night, and I've been thinking for a while now, like, where do I start this story? Because Green Lantern stories have built upon themselves for decades, and, do I want to go all the way back to the beginning of Green Lantern #1, or do I want to skip over a lot of that stuff? And I think I've settled on the best place to start this series is with Parallax, and when Hal Jordan gets infected by Parallax. So we are going to take a minute now and we're just going to discuss the entire history of Parallax from start to finish when it was Parallax Hal Jordan. In the description, I'm going to also leave a spreadsheet listing every comic book issue and when it came out. And this is going to be sort of a living document, so if I made a mistake or if I missed something, there's something that should be in there that I didn't include, please let me know down in the comments and I'll get that updated so that anybody that is looking for the correct line, if they want to go through the entire Parallax journey, can look right there. One of the most famous Green Lantern stories is when Mongol/Cyber Superman destroyed Coast City, home of Hal Jordan, killing 7 million people. Hal Jordan tries to use his willpower to resurrect the city, but eventually his ring runs out of power, which is when one of the Guardians of the Universe arrives and tells Hal that he's now using his ring for personal gain, and that's really not allowed in the Corps, and he needs to return to Oa for disciplinary action. Hal decides to return to Oa, but not stand trial. He wants power, vast amounts of power, so that he can restore his city permanently. He believes that the Guardians possess all of this power, but they don't want to use it to save the people that he actually cares about, and he reasons that he's done so much for the Guardians that they should just do this one thing for him. But since they refuse, now it's up to him to seize the power for himself and bring everyone back. He basically speedruns it back to Oa, and along the way the Guardians throw as many Green Lanterns as they can at him to try to stop him or reason with him. Kihan, Lyra, Tomar 2, Jack Chance, and he even cuts off Boudica's hand in order to take her ring. All of the Lanterns do the best they can, but each one ends up falling, and as they fall, Hal keeps acquiring their rings, making himself that much stronger. The Guardians at this point are throwing everything they have at him until the last Green Lantern, Kilowog, shows up. One of his good friends that tries to talk some sense into him, but Hal's able to knock him out pretty quickly and then just flies away. Finally, the Guardians resort to releasing his old mentor, Sinestro, who was imprisoned in the Central Power Battery to stop Hal. They have a bit of a fisticuffs, but ultimately Hal snaps his neck and makes his way towards the Central Power Battery. Just before he gets there though, Kilowog shows up again, and before they can really fight, Hal just completely obliterates him. He steps into the battery, taking all of its power and really killing anyone that was out in space and depending on that energy to survive. He then emerges and he's got a badass new outfit, and he's now going by the name Parallax. The Guardians decided to pour their remaining power into a single ring, and Ganthet is the only one to survive this ordeal, and he ends up giving that ring to Kyle Rayner. Parallax becomes a villain of Kyle Rayner and the Justice League, eventually leading into a comic event named 0 Hour: A Crisis in Time. This story starts as the timeline starts to collapse in on itself, and a minor hero named Wave Rider starts gathering up a bunch of random superheroes that he manages to find along his trip through time to figure out what the heck is going on. Eventually, Parallax reveals himself to have teamed up with Extant as the masterminds behind this, and it's actually Parallax trying to change existence to reconstitute the pre-Crisis on Infinite Earths-like multiverse, for he believes this is the best way to restore Coast City for good and correct some of the injustices that he's seen throughout the universe. Ultimately, Green Arrow is able to step in, and while Kyle holds off Parallax, Oliver shoots him through the chest and kills him, or so they think. In actuality though, Parallax has just disappeared, and in all my research I can't actually find a great reason as to why he did this. Maybe it was to regain some strength because they did weaken him a bit, but if anyone knows the actual answer to that, I would be very interested in hearing that. This was actually just so DC could reset the universe, I think, or at least just tie up a few loose ends from Crisis on Infinite Earths. It was kind of a bit of a mess of a story, and Honestly, you're probably just better off reading the cliff notes of this than actually reading the story and trying to follow what's happening and why people's motivations are the way that they are. So it is kind of important to the larger story of Parallax as a whole, as it is referenced a few times later in the series. But later he would show up again to tussle with Kyle Rayner about taking his old ring back, though since failing to recreate the universe the way he wanted, his motivations are pretty low in life, and he decides just to track down those responsible for the destruction of Coast City, and ultimately ends up at the end of the universe to kill Cyber Superman during the comic event The Final Night. Now this story is definitely worth a read, especially if you've been following Hal Jordan since his fall to Parallax, because this story is a huge impact on Hal and his journey going forward. But after he killed Cyborg Superman, he didn't really have any purpose in life, which is ironically when Kyle Rayner decided to seek Hal out and told him that there was an entity, kind of like a black hole, named the Sun Eater, and that ate part of the sun and was draining its power, and soon everyone on Earth was going to die. Hal basically told Kyle to F off, and he didn't want anything to do with the people of Earth, as he's basically a god now and doesn't care for all those small problems anymore, but really that wasn't true. After Kyle left, Hal wanted to see it for himself and traveled back to see what was basically a dying star, and then he decided to go see some of his old friends on Earth who were going through this crisis. He goes to Guy Gardner first and asks him how he kept on being a superhero while in the Corps when no one really liked him, to which Guy responds that he knows he's a hero and he's gonna do the right thing no matter what, whether or not people like him for it. Hal then goes to visit John Stewart, who's been crippled, and John just wants an explanation for why Hal turned into Parallax, but Hal doesn't have time, and he ends up curing John and tells him to remember him as someone that just tried to do the right thing and vanishes. He goes to see the grave of his best friend, Green Arrow, and then he goes to his old mechanic, Tom Kalmaku. Finally, he visits Carol Ferris, who is typically considered Hal Jordan's main love interest. He asks her to run away with him and live somewhere else together, though she responds by saying it's never been about them, and it's always been about the ones that needed a Green Lantern there to save them, which is why they can't be together now. This is one of those scenes that I love though, because this is where you see basically a broken man that is finally coming to terms with all of the terrible, evil things he's done and realizes that he's lost everything because of this crusade he went on. Not only that, but he also knows what he has to do, and he knows going into it that Carol is going to say that, because Carol knows him better than anyone else, and really he just wanted to see her one last time. At the same time that this is happening, Lex Luthor has devised a device that should shield the Earth from a supernova blast, though it counts on Kyle flying to the sun to implement it, but just as he tells him this, Kyle disappears right before their eyes. Now without Kyle, one member would now need to sacrifice himself to fly the device into the sun. Superman volunteers to go, but he is a very weak Superman as he doesn't have much radiation from the sun at this point, and a character named Pharaoh decides that Superman is too important to sacrifice himself, so he sneaks aboard the shuttle and flies towards the sun. What the Justice League didn't know was that Kyle got transported to Parallax, and Parallax told Kyle that he would save them. Parallax ends up showing up to the Justice League, and Batman, understandably, is very angry with Hal because of the history that they have, and says that this isn't a redemption for him, even though Superman then says that he's always hoped that the real Hal would come back. Though Hal responds at saying he's not back, he's just trying to set things right. He goes to save Pharaoh, returning him back to the Earth before he ends up making the ultimate sacrifice, by going to the center of the sun and unleashing all of the power he's gained from being Parallax, reigniting the sun and destroying himself, but saving everyone on Earth. This is one of the best hero sacrifices in the DC universe, I think, and it shows a complete character arc for a character that rose, fell, and then did everything he could to save the people of Earth in the end, not for personal redemption, but because he knew it was the right thing to do. Oh, you thought we were done? No, this is a comic book story, and death isn't often the end. A few years later, it's revealed that at the moment of Hal's sacrifice, the Spectre took over Hal's spirit, and in the comic run Day of Judgment, Hal Jordan became the Spectre, the Wrath of God. He existed like this for a while, though I'm not going to get into that run since it's a bit out of scope from the Parallax storyline, but eventually the run Green Lantern Rebirth comes out, which is going to put a huge spin on what we know about Hal Jordan for the past few decades. The story starts off with Kyle Rayner crashing to Earth with a green coffin, weak and injured, mumbling it has a name. Meanwhile, Spectre Hal shows up at the apartment of Green Arrow to stop a minor villain named Black Hand from stealing a power ring that he had given to Green Arrow previously. Once Green Arrow and the Spectre are able to defeat Black Hand, immediately Hal teleports away. He goes to visit Carol, and after only a few minutes with her, the Justice League shows up, asking him if it was him. Was it him who rebuilt the Coast City roads and his old apartment building? To which he replies he knows nothing about that. Then out of nowhere though, Green Lantern John Stewart goes a bit crazy and starts attacking everyone. Hal tries to step in, but the Spectre believes that he's needed elsewhere and teleports Hal away before he can actually do anything. Back at the JLA Watchtower, Green Arrow is looking at the ring that Hal gave to him years earlier when the ring suddenly duplicates itself and seeks out Guy Gardner, who had previously been about to die, but when he gets the ring again, it saves his life, making him once again a Green Lantern. At the same time that this is happening, Kilowog shows up to Kyle and tells him to use the ring. See, by this point, Kyle knows that something's wrong with the ring, and there's something inside of it tugging at his willpower, trying to take control. Kyle, without the ring, is no match for Kilowog, though at the last second, Ganthet appears and stops Kilowog in an attempt to save the coffin, which is revealed to be holding that of none other than the corpse of Hal Jordan. Hal finds himself in Coast City after being teleported and asks why he's been brought there. But since his old apartment is the only thing there, he decides I should go in and investigate. There he encounters the evil Parallax version of himself, which fights the Spectre for control of his willpower. And it's here that everything starts to become clear. Hal and the Spirit of Vengeance fight Parallax, and the Spirit starts to explain the truth about this being to Hal. Simultaneously, Ganthet teleports a more recovered Kyle Rayner to the Watchtower, where he meets up with Green Arrow and begins to explain who Parallax truly is. He tells Oliver that he met a group of aliens and they told him a story of a creature that feeds on fear. This being is as old as the universe, a parasite that feeds on all the fear of living things. Not only that though, but the yellow light is the color associated with the emotional spectrum, and fear is the exact opposite emotion than will. Billions of years ago, the Guardians trapped this parasite inside of the central power battery on Oa, which is why the rings were always weak to the color yellow. The much weakened Parallax was able to instill fear in the ring bearers and make their power useless against the color yellow, and this is why the Guardians set out to only find those capable of overcoming great fear to wield the power rings. Over time though, the weakness to the ring just became known as the yellow impurity. Over the years, Parallax had constantly been feeding Hal doubts and used the destruction of Coast City to fully latch on to his psyche and bring him to destroy the central power battery and free the parasite. When he did this, the parasite had latched on to Hal's soul though, and when Kyle's ring was forged, due to Parallax no longer being inside the central power battery, his ring did not have the same weakness to the color yellow as all previous lanterns. The Spectre tells Hal that he believes one reason that he was drawn to Hal Jordan's soul in the first place was because the Spirit of Vengeance was trying to eradicate the evil parasite from Hal Jordan's soul. Green Arrow and Kyle are then attacked by, wouldn't you believe it, Sinestro. But wait, didn't Hal snap his neck earlier in this journey as Parallax? Well, Sinestro goes on to explain that it was an illusion, a construct, put there by Parallax to complete his turn to the dark side, or I guess the yellow side. While Sinestro was trapped in the central battery alongside Parallax, he gained an understanding, and it makes perfect sense that after having been Hal's mentor, Sinestro was perfectly set up to guide Parallax onto what exact series of events would break down his former apprentice's willpower and allow fear to take hold. The only thing left unexplained is why the Guardians never mentioned this Parallax fellow to anyone, as they're the ones who initially trapped it, so they should be well aware of what was happening to Hal from the start. I feel like the series tries to imply that Parallax may have used some of its power to try and suppress the memories of the Guardians so that they wouldn't bring it up, though I think that's pretty flimsy. I think it's also possible that the Guardians were just holding secrets because they knew they messed up again and didn't want to tell anybody, since they seem to have messed up a lot in their past, and they really just try to sweep it under the rug and make sure that nobody realizes the mistakes they've made. Ultimately though, the Spirit of Vengeance is able to force the parasite off of Hal's soul, which is actually a bit of a double-edged sword, because once he does that, the spirit is no longer tethered to Hal's soul and leaves. Hal's soul starts to fade into the afterlife when, of course, our favorite little blue guardian takes a hold of his soul and yanks it back into Hal's corpse as Parallax then infects Ganthet. Immediately, Hal Jordan springs to life once again as a Green Lantern, and since his body was on the moon with Kyle, he immediately reawakens into a fight with Sinestro, where Kyle and Hal are able to force Sinestro back into the antimatter universe. Hal Jordan then formally introduces himself to Kyle Rayner, which is such a great moment to see, since even though Kyle has fought with Hal many times in the past, he really hasn't had any interaction with the uncorrupted Hal, unless you count that one time where he was sent back in time in, I think, Green Lantern 100-106, and met a younger Hal, but those were some odd circumstances, and I'm not even confident that any of them even remember what happened there. They then hightail it back to Earth to fight with the rest of the Justice League and free Ganthet from Parallax's possession, but Batman is immediately not happy that Hal is back and wants an explanation and tries to stop him, but Hal then just punches him in the face and says he doesn't have time for that and Batman can figure it out for himself, which is just kind of a funny scene. You know, he's the greatest detective, so I'm sure he could get it figured out. Alan Scott shows up and stops the Justice League from interfering any further, saying that this is a matter for the Green Lantern Corps to handle from here, and eventually the Lanterns are able to force Parallax back into the central power battery of Oa. Finally, the Guardians state that it's time to once again rebuild the Green Lantern Corps that was previously destroyed by Hal Jordan's Parallax. Hal is fully able to re-establish himself into the Green Lantern Corps and is absolved of any of his past crimes while under the influence of Parallax. Batman doesn't really buy it, but he does come over to them after they defeat Parallax and has a very tense moment with Hal, but ultimately says that the universe could use a little more light and finally acknowledges that Hal has returned for good. Well, that's going to wrap it up for the Hal Jordan Parallax story. And I know this was a long one, but it's just so important to know, I think, going into the 2005 run of Green Lantern. I'm sure there are parts that I probably skimmed over or left out entirely just because I don't think it added a whole lot of extra to the main plot points of the importance of Parallax. But if I did leave something out that you think is super important, please let me know down in the comments. I hope you guys enjoyed this story of Parallax as much as I did, and definitely, like I said, if there's anything I left out about Parallax or anything else that's going to play a major important role in the 2005 run of Green Lantern, then please let me know down in the comments. I want to come into this story with as much backstory as possible in as brief as possible before we get into the 2005 run of Green Lantern. But anyway, I'm Keegs, and I will catch you all later for some more comic book content.